Hello, I'm Antonio Mora. On a very dangerous day in Venezuela, where the U.S. recognized president of the country, Juan Guaido, urged an uprising against the dictatorship of Nicolás Maduro, we have a look at the alternate universes of the media coverage, the great divide between conservative and liberal news organizations. First, an important premise. What is happening in Venezuela today is not a coup, despite what the Russians, Cubans, and the Maduro regime will repeat as a propaganda mantra. Maduro has been an illegitimate dictator for years. He undermined the Venezuelan National Assembly after the opposition overwhelmingly won control in a parliamentary election in 2015. In 2016, he ignored a constitutionally mandated recall referendum he surely would have lost. That was followed by the unconstitutional creation of an all-powerful National Constituent Assembly that undermined what little power the National Assembly had left. Finally, he claimed another term as president after an election in May of last year that was deemed fraudulent by the U.S. and most major South American countries. Under the Venezuelan Constitution, having been elected by fraud, Maduro would then be an illegitimate usurper who is using the military to cling to power. In that context, the head of the National Assembly, Guaido, declared himself the legitimate leader of Venezuela in January. The U.S., along with most of Europe and Latin America, have recognized him as Venezuela's president. But a rogues gallery of countries supports Maduro, including Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, and Syria, with friends like those. However, complicating matters, the mostly toothless and spineless United Nations still sees Maduro as president. If you believe that Maduro is illegitimate and see Guaido as Venezuela's democratic leader, today's actions can not be a coup. So, how did the media cover Venezuela today? Cable news, as usual these days, failed in the early going, ignoring the news for a couple of hours while they mostly obsessed about how Joe Biden got a bump in the polls after officially announcing his candidacy for president. It was especially galling to hear crickets from CNN. For decades, we could count on CNN for strong international coverage. Who can forget Bernie Shaw, Peter Arnett, and John Holloman's spellbinding coverage of the bombing of Baghdad during the early hours of Operation Desert Storm? In the past, CNN would have been all over the story, quickly. Not so today. If you wanted information from television early this morning, you needed to turn to the international networks or to American Spanish language TV. Once the cable networks decided they should pay attention, Fox, which has covered Venezuela more than its competition, moved more quickly to tell the story. But its on-screen banners, just like those at its competitors, referred to the events as a coup. Fox was also faster to change its terminology and describe the events more appropriately as a rebellion or an uprising. Interestingly, for media observers, the dividing line between conservative and liberal media wasn't so clear when it came to print organizations. The news agencies were split. The Associated Press went with uprising, Reuters and the Agence France-Presse with coup, although Reuters changed that later in the day. On the right, the Wall Street Journal used uprising, but so did the liberal New York Times and Miami Herald. The Washington Post also avoided using coup by calling today's events a challenge to the dictatorship. USA Today lazily quoted the Maduro party line on its headline, which still says 12 hours later that Venezuela officials say they're fighting a coup attempt. The divisions in the American media coverage seem to be less between right and left and more between those who have covered Venezuela closely and those who have not. Internationally, the BBC and AFP have kept quoting the regime. Al Jazeera has cited both sides in its headlines. This is not just a fight over semantics. Aside from the terrible suffering of the Venezuelan people, media coverage of international events can shape American foreign policy. A media that has pulled back from reporting on the world cannot catch up immediately, as much of the misinformation about Venezuela showed today. Despite the Trump administration's harsh rhetoric, I don't believe we will see unilateral American intervention in Venezuela if the uprising fails. Barring extreme behavior by the Maduro regime, even multilateral military action along with Venezuela's neighbors who recognize Guaido isn't likely. Even so, the events in Venezuela are having profound effects on U.S. relations with Russia, China, and Cuba, and the American reaction to the unfolding crisis could have far-reaching consequences. Attention must be paid. We ignore the world at our own peril.